And early days, Rush was one of the targets. You know, in those days, you know, there were other bands, Foreigner, for instance.
Yeah.
You know, that for us, we're the epitome of the enemy. We had to create an enemy that we could be heroic, you know, combatants, you know. And some bands kind of fell perfectly into that role for us. So, you know, we would go to the Bay Area, for instance, San Francisco. We'd say, well, the Grateful Dead suck. Oh my God, you can't say. The phone lines would light up, and you know, and most of the people, 90% of the people would hate us, but that 10% said, yeah, right on. That's enough to fill a sweaty club. That's all we needed was that 10%.
Hey, here we are in your Uncle Joe's Garage, outfitted by California Car Cover, and it's NASCAR month at Uncle Joe's Garage. Auto Club 400 race, Auto Club Speedway is where you get your tickets on that. Very proud to have the finest percussionist in the world joining us here, an old friend, Stewart Copeland. Welcome to the garage.
Well, thank you very much. You know, there's one thing cool about this particular interview setting, this kind of car motif. These are the most comfortable interview chairs I've ever sat in. They don't swivel so much, but...
No, and they don't have the belts to actually hold you in, but everything is...
No, but we got the tire motif going in on the arm pads here.
You grew up internationally. What was your first car?
My first car was a Morris Minor Traveler, which was an English version of a Woody.
I was going to say it was built with plywood or something, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was a Woody, but it was the tiny little English European car, and I got it off some gypsies for 40 quid. And I discovered how to, what the underside of a car looks like when I had to climb under it and fix stuff.
Ooh. Was it big enough to haul a drum kit?
Yes.
There you go.
It was a kind of a station wagon thing. That's why I got it.
You have been involved in many projects before, during, and after the police. Currently, you've got the biggest, this has to be the biggest production you've ever been involved in, taking the movie Ben-Hur, The Tale of the Christ, which in itself is quite a title. This is a silent movie. Where did you run into this? Where were you inspired to come up with a soundtrack for a silent movie and have to go through everything you did on this project?
Yeah, well, this is certainly the most guys I've ever had on stage. Usually I've favored a smaller number of people on stage, as few as you can get away with. Mm-hmm. But this came as an incoming call quite a while ago to compose the music for an arena production of Ben-Hur, where right on the arena floor, it's like a tractor pull. They fill it with dirt, and they stage the whole thing, the chariot race, the pirate battle, and the whole book. And was acted, and right there on the arena floor, they had, it was acted in Latin and in Aramaic to keep it, and then a narrator in whatever language of the country was playing it. It was huge. Hundreds of underpaid Ukrainian extras. You know, horses, the Romans come charging in on horseback, beat up some Judeans, drag them. You know, it's a real spectacle. You know, they had Pink Floyd's designer create the set and everything. It was a big deal. Then that did its thing and went around and opened at the O2 Arena in London. And I ended up owning the music. Long story. Mm-hmm. And I figured I'd do a concert. And I maybe have like a slide of a chariot, to give the vibe. And then my manager, Derek Power, turned me on to this movie, which is like disc 7 of the DVD set or something, right? The Charlton Heston movie.
Yeah.
Way back there, disc 7 or something, is this movie that was made 40 years before, which is 90 years from now. So this black and white, silent film is twice the size of the Charlton Heston film. They could afford not thousands of extras, but tens of thousands of extras. And these enormous scenes that happen in front of the camera. When you see 2 full-sized ships in the ocean crashing into each other, and one of them catches fire and burns to nothing, it's happening in front of the camera. There's no CGI. And it has a power that when you watch a CG movie with all the special effects, and it cuts from this shot to that shot, you don't really get the impact. When you're watching Ben-Hur, this film, this ancient film, it's really happening in front of you.
And it would only make sense that the guy who makes his living bashing on things like drums would come up with the soundtrack for this.
Yeah, perfectly logical.
You're performing this with the Pacific Symphony Orchestra, so
yes.
you got, 100 musicians or so there?
Not that many, more like 60. But that's still a lot of guys on stage, and me with my chariot of fire. And so it's a big musical thing. It started out as a concert. And so it's a big, raging symphonic experience with me on the drums. We even got some electric guitar, but blazing orchestra. But actually, as I've been playing this show, I was up in Seattle a couple weeks ago, and I played with the Chicago Symphony and stuff. It's turning out that as I'm blazing, doing my thing like that, I look, glance out over there. They are riveted by the movie. And that's what people don't expect so much, is that such an ancient film can be so sophisticated and so resonant even unto this day.
Was the film easy to obtain the rights to?
It took a couple of years. In fact, I did spend 2 years getting the rights to it and curating it. And we had, eventually when I did get the rights, there's no department at Warner Brothers that deals with this. We had to find a department with a legal division that even knew what we were talking about. But eventually we did. We found way back in Warner Brothers lot, this little, group of nice ladies there, and nobody ever comes to their offices. Nobody ever calls them. And I go in there on fire with this mission. They all light up, and they kind of made this happen. So they went down to the vault, and they pulled out this 90-year-old celluloid in, I think 12 cans.
Yeah.
And it took 10 days to defrost. And we telecinied it. So now I have this version, which I spent the next year cleaning up, curating. Bad frames, a blotch on the frame, and I take the previous frame, cut out a little bit, stick it over. There was insects, right there on this frame. You can see an insect splattered on the thing. His little proboscis and his thorax and little wings and splattered onto the thing. And I should have kept those frames, but the curation was a big part of it.
This is perfect for you, though, all the little details.
I'm an app freak. I sit there with Final Cut Pro, which is the film editing app over here, and Digital Performer, which is the composing app over here, plus Sibelius, which is the scoring app, which is another whole can of worms. And I love to play with apps.
In the movie, there's a picture of the guy in the chariot race that's got the helmet with the wings coming off. Do you wear one of those when you're playing?
I do not, although I do dispute. The film is an incredible film, but I dispute some of the wardrobe choices. I think that Ben-Hur should have had a big old helmet with flames coming out of it and horns and, but the wardrobe, not so sure about that, but his performance, Ramon Navarro, is much better than Charlton Heston. He laughs, he sings, he's sad, he's happy, he's afraid, he's brave, he's a very, the actual character of Ben-Hur is quite complex, which you would never appreciate. That's not what you watch Ben-Hur for, is the complexity of the character, but it is a much more engaging character in this version.
And do you find, because you've worked with orchestras, you've done all kinds of scores and that kind of stuff, and now playing Pacific Symphony, which is a very good organization, do you find the bass players rush the beat?
No, they don't. They follow the conductor. They are players of the eye, and which is another long story. Players of the ear, who, like rock musicians, they hear it and they stare off into space. Players of the eye, those orcs, the guys in the orchestra, their information gets to their fingers from their eye. They navigate from left to right across the page. Their sense of rhythm comes from a visual cue, the baton, and so they don't rush at all. They're really good at changing tempi. They can suddenly start this bar slower and then speed up and then go down, because a lot of classical music does that. Me personally, I like constant tempo and 4 on the floor, so they're real happy when I come along.
You must have been going nuts, though. What was a Synchronicity album you recorded in Montserrat that you were in a bedroom or something, and someone else was stuck in another room? And
yeah, I was in the dining room.
You were in the dining room. Yeah. Was this to separate you from getting in trouble?
No, it had that effect, though. I would be up in the dining room. It was because of the sound. There was this big wooden room with a great sound. So the drums are up there. The other two guys are, Andy is in the big recording room by himself with all his amps and pedals. Sting's in the control room. And so I'm up there looking at a screen of two grumpy guys. And because when you do the drums, everybody's waiting for you to get your part, because they can't start building the album until they got the drum track, the backing track. And so they're all, come on, Copeland, get it together. And I can see I'm up there and I do a take. And I can see the screen. I can't hear them, but I can see them. And I'm getting grumpy myself.
Yeah. You look back, out of all the songs you worked with those two guys, what is your favorite? What's one you don't mind listening to?
Can't Stand Losing You, Message in a Bottle, Mosoko Tanga. There's a few. I have to say, People say, do you ever get sick of it? You know, if I'm driving along in my car and a tune comes on the radio, I listen to it. You know, there's the things I would have done a little different now, you know, the end of Message in a Bottle, too many drum overdubs, you know. It's such a great song, and then it comes to the end, and I switch over to the other station because I screwed up. You know, where was Andy at that moment? He was really good filter for all that, because we'd all overdid it. And then usually Andy would say, no, too much, less is more. And he was right, usually, but where was he when I needed him at the end of Message in a Bottle?
You've become good friends with Neil Peart.
Yes.
I'm glad to say. That's like two of the greatest percussionists on the face of the earth.
Ah, shucks.
Well, there you go. And I was surprised that Neil admitted that he had copped some licks from you in Rush.
He is a very big man, physically and morally. And early days, Rush was one of the targets. You know, in those days, you know, there were other bands, Foreigner, for instance. You know, that for us, we're the epitome of the enemy. We had to create an enemy that we could be heroic, you know, combatants, you know. And some bands kind of fell perfectly into that role for us. So, you know, we would go to the Bay Area, for instance, San Francisco. We'd say, well, the Grateful Dead suck. Oh my God, you can't say. The phone lines would light up, and, you know, and most of the people, 90% of the people would hate us. But that 10% said, yeah, right on. That's enough to fill a sweaty club. That's all we needed was that 10%. We'd get them. And so, unfortunately, Foreigner, who I met years later, turned out to be the greatest guys. Oh, and I was at a show. Every song was a hit. You know, oh my God, you know. They came to one of our shows back in the early days, and we were all like uncomfortable. Like, I hope they have them ready. And you know, all three guys in Rush are big enough that they couldn't care less what I said years ago. We get along great. And they kind of tease me about it, and I go all like, you know, like repentant. But that's how big they are.
Well, it's a pleasure having you in here. Again, the gig that you're doing, Ben-Hur, The Tale of the Christ, you're playing at Cal State Northridge. VPAP, I believe, is the Valley Performing Arts
Center.
That's
the cool thing about classical music, is that I get to play in all these beautiful architectural masterpieces, and most importantly, the showers kick ass.
I never thought of that.
Oh man, that's why I don't play clubs anymore.
Well, that completely took us to a different place I don't think we want to think about right now. But thank you so much for being in here. Anytime you're in the neighborhood, you're welcome.
All right, okay.
And I'll have guitars and drums next time.
All right.
Yeah.
Hey, I know that you, yes you, haven't been in the Uncle Joe's Garage yet, but I got some good news. We have created a mobile version of the Uncle Joe's Garage, thanks to our friends at Mike Thompson RV Superstores. Like they say, don't miss a moment, and don't miss the mobile Uncle Joe's Garage coming to a location near you.